Founders waste huge amounts of time blasting cold emails to investor when the data is pretty clear. Warm introductions make you 100 times more likely to get a meeting with an investor. And I've seen it play out across 120 plus successful fundraisers. So in this video, I'm going to show you the numbers behind cold versus warm outreach, my process to get warm intros, and the free tool that can change your results this week. But first, I just want to give you a reality check so you don't make the same mistake that I've seen plenty of founders make when it comes to fundraising. Because if you're still blasting cold emails to investors, you might as well be shouting into the void. Like, seriously, the data just doesn't lie. From what I've seen, that warm intros are about 100 times more likely to get a meeting. 100. That's not a lie. That's not a typo. It comes from the data that I've collected from the successful funding rounds I've done with founders and the general benchmarks that happen in a fundraise. So let me show you what I mean. So if we go to this, for example, this is a calculator that I've built, and you can see the numbers for yourself. And what I want you to do is, if you comment outreach calculator down below or click the link in the description, then you'll be able to use this yourself, because when you plug in your own outreach stats, you can see what happens when you swap the cold emails you're trying to do for the warm intros and see how much the difference is night and day. But if we go back to this, what you can see here is these are the general benchmarks of what it takes to do cold outreach versus warm outreach. And you can start adding in your own of what makes the most sense to you. But what you're going to start seeing is that as you start to move these around and you change these benchmarks, the warm versus cold out multiplier completely changes. I've also seen is that you need around 35 to 40 investor meetings just to have a shot at raising. So if you're relying on cold emails, you're making this 100 times harder, because you need to be reaching out to, if we go back to here, from a general benchmark point of view, you need to be reaching nearly 7,000 touches just to successfully fundraise. And that's not what we want to be doing. So why are you making this harder for yourself when there's a shortcut every top tier founder's using, which is making sure they actually build their network and get the warm intros they need to successfully meet investors? But now you're probably thinking, all right, Gian, I get it. Warm intros. Everyone tells me warm intros, but how do I actually get them? I don't have a great network. You can keep telling me this, but that doesn't really mean anything, because if blasting 6,000 emails to get to 40 meetings isn't it, what's the system that actually gets me in the room with real investors that could potentially invest into me? Well, the good news is, in this video, I'm about to break down now the step-by-step to make sure you actually build a proper investor network to successfully fundraise for your startup, and what the top 1% of founders are doing, and what you need to learn over multiple fundraisers. So this is a 3-step process. So let's kick off with step 1. And the best way to show you is to tell you about my client, Vanessa, who I helped raise $1 million for recently. So she was a founder who swore up and down she didn't know a single investor. She was convinced she had no way to meet them consistently, and that she was never going to be able to meet the kind of investors she needed. And after failing via cold messaging that got nowhere, she was honestly ready to give up. She just thought she couldn't get the right people in. But then we just tried this one thing, and I call it the connector map. And what we did is, all I asked for her to do, we did this in one session. It was the easiest thing ever. All I asked her to do was looked at who she was chatting over the last few years and in her previous startup roles or company roles. And within 2 days, it turned out that her old boss was in tech and working at a VC-backed startup. And 2 intros later, she had her first investor meeting booked. Now, some would say this is just magic or luck. But we just kept on doing this over and over again because she had a consistent way of doing that and a system. And what happened is it resulted in about 45 investor meetings for her round. So she didn't do this by spamming investors via cold emails or DMing them on LinkedIn, but instead mapped out connectors she already had and actually used them properly. And by doing this exercise, she realized how great her network actually was. She didn't think she had a great network, but she'd just not done the work to actually map out her connectors in the right way. And almost every founder I meet thinks their network is useless. I definitely did when I was starting too. But it's just not true. You just need a simple system to actually start digging it up and actually use it in the right way, because you do have a great network. You just haven't got a process to get it working in the right manner. And that's why this should always be your first step. Build your connector map. It's really the treasure map to get the warm intros at scale. But how do you actually build your own connector map then? So all you need is actually just a table. And I use Notion with my clients, but you can use Google, whatever. And this is a Notion that I use with my clients. But what we can then start to add in is write down every single colleague, college friends, past clients, advisors, people you've speaking to in the last couple of years, even that one mate who seems to know everyone. If you feel like you can ask them for something in the future or actually build a relationship, don't overthink it, just write down names. So you should be checking all of your LinkedIn connectors, going through the emails of your last 2 years, checking personal social media, and doing it for every single person in your team, and write down all of the list of people that you have. And once we have this, we can then start to get organized on who can actually potentially connect us to the right people and start to map out our network. But now once we have this, we've completed the first step. So let's move on to step 2 on how to actually get those intros to happen, because organization is not everything. So step 2 is all about making your ask a no-brainer so that those contacts actually want to introduce you. And this is where most people screw up. And here's why that usually happens. So I want you to picture this. You're scrolling through LinkedIn, and then boom, you spot someone who's connected to 3 or 4 investors that you've been dying to meet. What do you do next? What do 99% of founders do next? What they do, and if this is your first move and you've probably done this, is, hey, can you introduce me to investors? Just no one's going to invest into you. No one's going to help you. And you're going to be telling everyone that you don't have a functioning network, but it's because you've been so transactional and short-termist that no one's willing to help you, because all you're ever doing is asking. And it's because you're treating your network and intro building as a javelin that only goes one way. And you're just throwing it and you're hoping it sticks. When what you should be thinking of is your network being like a boomerang. What you throw out, whether it's value, help, genuine interest, is always going to come flying back as warm intros. This is the rule of reciprocity, if you really need to know. But if you just lob asks, it'll never come back to you. And no one is going to be willing to help you back, because all you're doing is asking. Let me give you a real world example. So one founder I worked with, Daniel, stopped blasting "can you introduce me" emails, and instead he just reached out to connectors with something useful, a relevant article, an intro to someone they needed, his own expertise, or even just a quick congrats on their latest win. And what happened is suddenly people just started replying. And a week later, after giving all of this, and towards the end after doing this, asking, hey, is there a couple people you should introduce me to? He had 2 connectors lined up to give him warm intros. And by the time he raised, he had about 20 of them and was able to get 50 meetings by the time he raised his €4.5 million round. And he did all of this by not being transactional and leading with value. He stopped being that founder who wants something and started being the founder that everyone wanted to help, because he was genuinely interested. He was genuinely giving them value as much as possible. And that's what allowed him to meet enough investors to make him fundraise in the future. So what I want you to do for your end is I just want you to pick 3 connectors from your map. So, pick 3 of them. And I want you to reach out with something valuable. So no asks, not at the beginning, just help. And I want you to think about it in 4 different ways. It can be an article, it can be an intro, it can be a genuine compliment, or you giving them expertise if you've spoken to them before, you can actually know what that is, of course. Now I just want you to repeat and watch what comes boomerang back, because if you're structured in this, if you're meeting 5 people a week doing this, suddenly your network exponentially increases. And the benefit of being really organized and doing step 1, as if is when you look at this list and you're being organized and you're actually putting notes in, you're saying what they're specialized in and you're helping them, what you can do is you can just start looking at your list and you can say, okay, I can now connect the dots on who I should introduce to who. And you just start introducing connect to 1 to connect to 5 to connect to 10 to all of this. And then it's so easy for you to be the person that's giving loads of intros because you've organized yourself. And it just makes people want to give you more intros as you go. Now, this is great and all. But what happens when you're doing 10 different things in your business and you can't keep on top of this? Because that's the hardest part about fundraising as a whole, but also just building a business. There's so many different things you need to be doing at the same time. And that's exactly where step 3 comes in. And honestly, this is what separates the amateurs from the pros. Because it's very easy for me to tell you this stuff, but organizing your intro process before you start fundraising and keeping yourself organized in that process is how you successfully fundraise. So I had a founder called YY who used to just ask for intros on the fly. So he'd get a meeting here and there, and rounds would just drag on for months. But once he started mapping his connectors, prepping them a week or 2 before launch, and timing his asks, then everything changed. He went from scattered calls that didn't really have a proper pipeline to a flood of investor interest in the same week. And that's what created the FOMO momentum for him to raise his $1 million plus round. Because what I've seen is that most founders just wing it. They ask for intros whenever they remember. So 1 here, 1 there, spread out over weeks, asking for as much as possible, not getting much back. And what happens then is you get a trickle of meetings. You get no momentum, and investors can smell that you're not in demand. Without a burst of meetings, you lose that everyone's fighting to invest kind of vibe, and then your round is just going to keep dragging on and on and on, and you're not going to be able to actually get towards a term sheet. So how do you fix this then? What I want you to do is get organized before your fundraising starts. So you need to map out exactly who can intro you to which funds. At that point, you can also spot the gaps or the bottlenecks you have. Then this is where most founders go wrong. You ask when you need to, but I want you to ask your connectors in advance if they're going to intro. And that last part is really the secret sauce. So instead of asking your connectors when you need the intro, if you confirm a few weeks before you officially launch when it's time to go, then when you ask them for it, they're prepped and ready. They know who they're going to introduce you to, and all those intros drop at once. And you'll have some time before the launch also to understand where you're missing connection to funds, what's working, what's not, and even suddenly, sometimes realize that you need to kind of take a step back and maybe go out fundraising in 6 months' time in a much better way. And what's going to happen is suddenly you're going to have a calendar stuffed with meetings. And when that happens, investors are going to start to feel the heat because they're going to be asking themselves, why is everyone talking to this founder? What am I missing? If I take my foot off the gas and kick the can down the road, am I going to lose this deal? And that's what's going to really do the heavy lifting and creating momentum and FOMO in your round more than anything else. You know, I've seen it firsthand with founders. Before working with me, they had this trickle in bad pipeline, investors not really feeling anything. They took a step back and they rejigged and pre-prepped with me. And when they did this, the investor floodgates opened because investors could feel this heat and this excitement around the round because everyone was talking to them at the same time. So you just learned the 3 steps that turn investor networking from a game of chance, frankly, into a system that can actually win and give yourself a 100 higher chance of getting investor meetings. But I know every founder's journey is different. So here's what I want you to do next. If you want to learn how I can help you get 50 plus warm intros by the time you fundraise, check out the Investor Access Machine, which is a program that's structured to make sure you build warm introductions. And if you're ready to go even deeper, don't miss my next video where I break down the exact system I've used to help founders raise over $250 million.